Welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. Chris Boyd is a certified financial planner practitioner and senior vice president financial advisor at Wealth Enhancement Group, one of the nation's largest registered investment advisors. We call it Something More because we'd like to talk not only about those important dollar and cents issues, but also the quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Here he is, your fulfillment facilitator, your partner in prosperity, advising clients on Cape Cod and across the country. Here's your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
All right, joining me today is Jeff Perry and Russ Ball. We are all from the AMR team at Wealth Enhancement Group. Thanks for being with us. And today, we had occasion where we had a client who was talking to us about the passing of a parent, and the thought occurred to me that this is not unique. We run into circumstances like this with some, frequency, not all the time, of course, but, where a family member dies and there's a need for thinking about some of the planning and issues that come out of that. And we thought we'd talk about that today on our show, try to give you some helpful, thoughtful things to consider as you embark on that kind of a circumstance. Jeff, do you want to just comment a little bit about this? I mean, you've been through it too, I'm sure. So
I have. It's been 5 years next month since my mother passed, and I think first of all we should address kind of the emotional thing. I think there's a tendency when we have a loss of that significance to want to start taking care of the details and getting into whatever the things. Many of these things we're going to talk about today, but it's important that you allow yourself time to grieve. You allow yourself to have those emotions, and that you surround yourself with emotional support and not just throw yourself into the logistics and the details.
Well, that's a really good point. I think far too often people are prone to just try to, maybe it's nervous energy, busy energy, but they tend to jump right into it and want to resolve everything instantaneously.
Well, I think it's because they're trying, they know they can't fix the situation. They know they can't bring mom back and, your dad back, whatever. And I know you lost your dad, so you have a reference to this as well. So we kind of focus on what we can control, right? And so we can control about doing paperwork. We can control about checking on the house or checking on the surviving spouse if there is one, or whatever it is. And so we just throw ourselves into that, and we don't allow ourselves to really kind of settle into what's happened and, the emotional side of it, and taking care of the family members and the emotional side of it, not just the details. But the details are important, and I know we're going to focus on those. But I just wanted to have my opening thoughts about.
That's a great point. I think it's too often we run into circumstances where people in that nervous energy or whatever.
Yep.
They just, and sometimes it's anxiety, right?
Sure.
Well, maybe do we have enough to cover these issues? Is there cash? Is there liquidity? We got to get the life insurance moving. We got to move the IRAs, or whatever. They start jumping right in and thinking, oh, let's get into crisis mode and address these things, right?
And really, generally, those things that we're going to discuss, and some that you mentioned there, are not an emergency. I mean, there's no we need to do this today. It's good to get organized. It's good to move forward, but none of them are an emergency. So give yourself some leeway, some grace to take care of the important things first, and certainly get organized and move forward and get the details done and do the planning, but don't put extra anxiety on yourself.
And I do think, this maybe prelude, does lead to the idea that it's important to do some forward planning in advance of some of these kind of circumstances. When it comes to the estate planning, when it comes to having liquidity reserves, having some important documents, maybe some guidance for whoever's coming in behind you, to know what there is, where to find it, some of those kind of things. But I think that's really a part of that thought process, is the preparations that one can do for their family members.
Well, it's an excellent point, Chris, because the two ends of this situation is someone who does a lot of planning, communicates the plan uh, to the executor, to the trustee, whatever it would be, to the family members, and so everybody kind of knows what the plan is, knows where the documents are, knows who the attorney is, know who the financial advisor is, and so that's one scenario, which is actually a gift you give to your family to be prepared for your own death and to be clear on what you want, how you want things handled, and have liquidity so no one's stressing about how the light's going to stay on at
Yeah.
dad's house or mom's house. Versus the other scenario, which we see probably as frequently as the plan scenario, is that no one knows anything. No one knows if there's a estate plan. No one knows the passwords to any of the online accounts. No one knows if there's a safety deposit box, and that creates a huge amount
A
of
lot of anxiety.
stress.
Yeah. Avoidable anxiety.
Avoidable. Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
say it's a gift to your family if you do the proper estate planning and you include family members who are appropriate, and really take that off of that burden, if you will, of
Yeah.
putting that onto your family members when they're already in some type of
It
grief.
it is common for one partner, spouse, to be more engaged, and it is common for one spouse to be less engaged in the financial life. It's not to say that's always the case. We run into some families where it's very much mutually involved, and Jeff, you talk about how you and your wife have regular review of things together, and so there's a good familiarity with all this stuff.
Yes.
But I think not everyone has that, and oftentimes when it's the surviving spouse who is left with the
Mhm.
I don't deal with this stuff, it's foreign to me, she did all of that.
Mhm.
It can be very stress filled because now it's suddenly I have to learn something I've been putting off for all these years and never really wanted to know because that was their thing. you
Right.
know so it can add stress, but it is, I think, important for um, there to be some uh, involvement to the point where there's at least sufficient awareness of some of these things. And the more you can do some of that, even on the periphery, the better you are when the time comes that you step into that role of I need to be more involved. It's not as uh, uh, uncomfortable maybe or overwhelming about um, you know we've been dealing with volatile markets lately. Well, that's something that if you've never
Right.
dealt with it before, suddenly it becomes really anxious ridden in a time when you're like, do I have enough? Will be able to make ends meet? And so
Mhm.
all the things that people do in this time when they are grieving. So um, yeah, just try to share some of that. Not only hey, this is where my important documents are kept, and here's a letter of instruction, who to call when something happens, which is a really good
That
idea,
would be great, right?
you
Yeah.
know. But uh, okay, so Jeff, Russ, I think you wanted to add something. Am I right?
Well, I guess just to Jeff's point, I think there's such a level of overwhelm, whether
Mhm.
it's a spouse or a parent, or especially if it's a sudden passing. There's so much going on. You have to call family members. You start getting letters. And then you have to think about funeral arrangements and these types of things, and especially if it's one person or a couple people, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with, let alone the
Yeah,
financial
in the
picture.
immediacy of it is, we've got funeral arrangements, we've got to come up
Right.
with an obituary and
Exactly.
eulogies and,
And
all the things that go into that immediacy of the passing.
and all the logistics involved on top of the emotional overwhelm.
grief. Yeah.
It's a lot to deal with.
So usually the financial can take a back seat to that. It doesn't need to be addressed until after that has been done. Although I do see, by the way, it seems like people have a longer period from the time of one's passing to it seems more common to me that
Culturally, yeah.
yeah,
Seems
that
to have
we're
changed.
having, you know what I mean?
Yep.
That
Definitely see it.
instead of like, a celebration of life, within a week or so, suddenly, people are going weeks and months between the time of passing to some of those.
Very common. We're going to a service on Saturday, and the lady has been deceased for probably 2 months.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
Well, in that case, you might be needing to deal with some of the financials a little sooner. Right. In that instance,
I
but
would
in
think so.
most instances, you're dealing with this, get through the grieving, the immediacy of all of that. Then let's turn our attention to some of the financial implications. Now, we could talk about maybe some of the things that are common things people want to deal with. I mean, probably the first and most obvious is you need to obtain a death certificate. That's usually provided through the funeral home in the process. They usually provide.
They do. And one piece of advice from not only myself, but other people that I know have gone through this: order more than you think you need.
Yep, there's a cost for a death certificate. You may not be aware of this, but
there is,
for,
yeah.
for an actual embossed or whatever they are, death certificate, there's a charge to obtain those.
Yep.
Some people tend to be a little bit hesitant to, oh, how many do I really need? But
Yeah, don't order one,
Yeah.
just to think you can photocopy it, because many institutions require an original, right?
So, who might be examples of people that would require a death certificate, Jeff?
Well, certainly any governmental agency, depending if you're applying for survivor benefits on a pension, perhaps, or maybe you're going to look at survivor benefits on Social Security. Any governmental, the Veterans Administration, they'd want originals. And I think there's some brokerage firms and other financial institutions that want
Right.
a
Banks
death
and
certificate.
brokerage. Yeah.
And
If
just
your life insurance,
Life insurance.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah. And
Yeah.
there's two types of, by the way, there's two types of death certificates. One has the cause of death and all the details, and one does not have that. So,
Good point.
yeah, if you
Circumstances, maybe you don't necessarily need that information.
that's right. So if that's one of your concerns about, sharing death certificates, there is a short version, a long version, and I believe that the governmental agencies certainly will take a short version. A life insurance may require a long version, depending on the cause of death and depending on the policy type.
Right. Yeah. Not sure. Good point. That's
Mhm.
that's a tidbit I hadn't even thought of.
Yep.
I think there's a temptation to maybe be hesitant to inform the pension company and the
Hmm.
Social Security that
Mhm.
there's been a passing, because it's like there's income coming in that might be changed or disrupted. But guess what? Go
Well,
ahead, Jeff.
it's the law, and Social Security is one of those mandated. When there's a death certificate filed, it automatically goes to Social Security Administration. So
There's not a lot of people 300 years old
Well,
getting Social Security.
I'm not saying there's not flaws in the system.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I know, or data entry mistakes, right?
Yeah.
But yes, you do have to report these things in a timely manner. And, we do see in the news some stories that people who passed away and, people don't report it and things get Social Security fraud. And it does happen. But if you go to a funeral home and report, and ask for a death certificate, which
It's gonna get back to
it's
Social
gonna,
Security.
so you may as well do it right. And,
Yeah, and just you don't want to be in a position where you have to pay back substantial sums if you delayed very long. I mean, things don't necessarily happen instantaneously, as we said, but you don't necessarily want to be in arrears for 6 months or a year because
Right.
or whatever, because that gets clawed back, and you end up having to repay that money.
Yep.
And you don't want to have spent it and needed, and all that kind of thing. So okay, so in terms of life insurance, I've been on the other side of this as a life insurance agent early in my career. when we've had a death claim and delivering a check to a family. These days, I think mostly it comes in the form of some kind of an account.
Mhm.
That's an interest-bearing account that you can write checks against or whatever. But same concept. That notion of um, having those resources that have been planned for, and I find that at least in the past when I've been involved in this, it seemed to happen generally pretty quickly. Um, Russ, did you have life insurance involved in your family story? That was it something that happened quickly?
In terms of getting the
The death
death
benefit?
benefit, well, you need the like Jeff said, you need the death certificate, so that took a little while, and
Yeah.
then you have to submit it, and then it did take. It wasn't immediate, and
Yeah.
I know some insurance policies offer like advance.
Oh, yeah. But there's usually some cost associated with that.
Yeah. So it's definitely not ideal, but it did take some time. It probably 2 or 3 weeks, I would say. So yeah, everything sorted between
Yeah.
getting the death certificate and
See,
everything else.
I hear that and I think, well, that's pretty quick.
Well, like if you need the access to the funds right away, if there wasn't proper planning done to get bank accounts in order and to get beneficiary designations on file, it can change the dynamics. But it felt like a long time.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess.
When you're in that moment trying to deal with it and plan for paying some bills and stuff, it probably creates stress.
Mhm.
Banking is another topic that's challenging because on one level,
It depends.
yeah, on one level, you kind of want to keep those accounts open
Mhm.
as funds come in, and I guess if you have a joint account, that can be much more efficient. On the other hand, um, if you're getting checks made payable to a deceased person, how do you process those?
Well, I think
Um,
it's really important that you keep the bank account open, even if there's money going out, it's the bank account can tell you a lot about the person's life and what their
yeah.
obligations are. A lot of people have auto pay set up for every bill that they have. So if nothing else, you're gaining information about what you have to take care of if you're the executive for in this case.
That's a
Uh,
good point. Uh, Auto pay, right?
right. Yeah.
Is these kind of things can be huge. I went to an FPA talk recently, and I think we'll try to get the presenter as a guest sometime on our show. But she was talking about digital footprint and all this kind of thing. And I mean, your automatic banking is one example. And she was talking about a widower who he hadn't been paying the bills because it wasn't one of the bills he was used to paying, and the
Yeah.
lights suddenly turned off.
Super
Super
common.
common.
And it's like, oh yeah, that was paid out of her account. That kind of thing. So you can imagine circumstances like that where if you're not keeping those accounts active, but better to be, this is again for planning. Make sure your accounts are joint accounts or in a trust or some mechanism that is appropriate for at your passing that can make those funds accessible readily, not require probate, that kind of thing.
One of the related issues to the bank accounts and other accounts is passwords. Right.
Yeah.
So, more and more everything we do is online, and passwords are something that people either have one and they keep in their head, or they use a Google password, or some other type of password management system, or
Right.
they write them down on a sticky note somewhere that you'll never find. So it's
because I can relate to that. Yeah, sure.
it's a tricky question, though. I mean, we're inundated with protect your passwords, however you
Right.
do it.
Right.
And then we're asking you, don't forget to share your passwords in case you pass away.
Right. And don't
write
share
them
your
down.
passwords, but share your yeah.
Right. So it's
Possibly the virtues of one of those programs that helps to remind you remember passwords, but does someone else know how to get access to that?
and do they know that you're using it? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a delicate issue, but it is a burden that you're putting on your executor or your heirs, or the people that you're asking to take care of, maybe a surviving spouses that you have access not just to the funds, but to the actual information that you need
Right.
to manage.
We'll come back and do a deeper dive on digital assets and
Okay.
planning for that on another show, because I think that's a very full topic in and of itself. So going back to, when a parent passes, one of the obvious things is to make sure that the home is secure.
Right.
Who has keys besides you, or do you, right? But making sure that you have uh, that kind of limited, as to who can access things.
I was surprised at who had keys after my mother passed.
That's a good.
Virtually everyone.
Yeah, well, and particularly if you have multiple family members, it would
Neighbors.
be natural for maybe multiple family members to have keys. But if you are the executor of the estate, you might want to have limits on who has access to what, who's taking what from the home,
Change
so
the
that
locks.
it goes by plan. What's up?
Change the locks.
Change the locks. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably the right answer.
Because you don't know.
No, it could be lots of people that aren't family as well.
Could
Right?
be a repair person that had a key for a moment and no one got it back.
Yeah.
Could be, who knows?
So it's secure the property and also the valuables inside the property.
Yeah.
Right.
That's also important to consider, especially if you don't know, who has access.
And turn off the water.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Yeah. Laughing because I'm notoriously been bad with that on our own house with the change in seasons. I'm much better now after learning a lesson. What about things like Medicare or the Veterans Administration? How does one go about that? That becomes another topic to think about. Make sure you get these, particularly if there's outstanding costs with regard to medical expenses late in life.
Yep.
Find and identify legal documents. If there is a will, it may be the guidance of how things are handled for settling an estate. And I think what's funny about this, Jeff, is that far too often people really don't know what they don't know when it comes to the settling of an estate.
Right.
There's a lot involved, and we tend to think, well, I can do this. It's not that big a deal. And sometimes that's true, but there's things that get overlooked in that process. And there may be reasons it's advantageous to deal with it. Give you an example of something that came up recently. The idea of a widow we were talking with, I forget if it was a widow or widower, but anyway, a family we were talking with, and the residents of the house, there was never anything done to address do you remember who this was? I forget who it was but address the step up in basis that would be benefited on the house at the first spouse's passing. There'd never been any steps to make that notation, make that, materialize that the virtue of, how are we going to get that benefit of a step up in basis? Was there any appraisal being done at that time? Was there a filing of an estate tax to address these kinds of issues? Were brokerage accounts changed so that the basis of investment assets that were jointly owned adjusted to include half of that step up in basis or whatever?
Right.
So there's a variety of different circumstances, so it's hard to speak generically about this, but these are things that oftentimes people don't know to do.
Right.
But if they don't, it can undermine. They end up paying more taxes, is ultimately what it means, and they may be benefited by actually seeking counsel from a professional, a lawyer who does estate settlement, kinds of the wills and trusts.
Well, just that issue alone would probably save, and depending on the size of the asset,
The cost of the
could
service.
would
Yeah.
the typical household could cost you more by not getting professional advice.
Yeah, it's a good example, right?
Mhm.
Right. So find those documents, identify who the relevant person is who's going to essentially be, they used to call it an executor, executrix. What do they call it now? Representative?
Personal representative.
And identify that and get that process started, which is a lengthy process. It requires public notifications and inviting contests. And
Yeah, it's a judicial process.
yeah, so it takes time. What are some other things that people need to think about?
I wrote down one that was pretty interesting, to notify the credit bureaus and credit agencies. So there's no
good idea.
yeah, like
Lock the credit down.
Right, fraud. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's one I wouldn't have thought of, but it's a important one.
yeah.
Sadly, I've read some articles on that, Russ. You're absolutely right. And sadly, most of the cases of fraud are related to the decedent.
Right.
Yeah, and then to that point, you got to cancel credit cards
Mhm.
that aren't being used anymore. You've got to go through the process of turning off the electricity or moving it to a different name or whatever it's going to be. But these are things. Often, many of these considerations, changing the title to your IRA to the beneficiary, and these are things you probably should do after you've had that consultation with the attorney, in case there are some decisions that this could have implications of the options of how you might handle some aspect of the estate, whether it's the whether when at what level do you consider the value of the estate, on what date? Well, some of these decisions could impact that prospect, as an example.
Yep.
So that was a good one. I think cars.
Cars is a tough one, because it's even people who have family trusts, they've done some work, so they want to avoid probate, they want to keep it private, they want an ease of transition, all the reasons that someone might do a family trust.
Yeah.
And they put their house into it, so that makes it easier. They put their brokerage account into it, and then they kind of move on in life and say that was done, and then they get a new car, right?
Yeah.
Or they buy a boat or a mobile home, an RV or something that isn't insignificant in value, and does have to go through a process of who gets it. But if it's not in the trust, in my scenario here, it has to go through probate. And there is a simplified version of probate, not a full blown probate. If it's just a simple vehicle, maybe, and not a lot of assets,
keeps it pretty quick, right?
Right, but maybe not. Maybe this person has a lot of toys or extra things, and it can create, in the other example, I'm kind of going backwards here, but people create trusts and never fund them. They go through the whole legal process.
Talk about that. That's actually a great one to bring up.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that, because I think that's often the case. People go to the lawyer, they get their binder,
they
put it on the shelf, kind of like you do with your tax return, and then you realize, 9 months later, you're supposed to have been doing these estimates on your tax return. Well, there's things you got to do with your estate plan.
Yeah, exactly. They get all the great advice, and their lawyer spent hours and hours protecting their future and their heirs, and they walk around and say, we have a family trust. And even if the lawyer was very, most lawyers are very good at articulating, like, this is step one.
You still have to do, right? Yeah.
And here's, I know attorneys who give their clients worksheets, like, here are the items that should be in this trust, and here's who to contact. Like, I have a brokerage account at Schwab. Okay, we'll contact your financial advisor, and they can help you put this asset into the trust, and so forth. But they just think they're done when they left the lawyer's office, like your tax example. And so, 10 years later, they pass away, unfortunately, and the loved ones know that they have a trust, but
they have a plan.
There's nothing in it.
But they didn't fund the plan
So
and
unless
didn't execute the plan properly, essentially, right?
so two scenarios play out. One is they have a will, and the will says everything goes to the trust, but that's still probate because you
Yep.
have a will,
Cost and time and effort.
right?
Yep.
Or the will says a whole different scenario than the trust.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, which can happen too, right?
Yep. Beneficiaries A, B, C, D in the will, and beneficiaries A, B, C, D, E, F, G in the trust. And there's no assets in the trust, so therefore the will's going to rule the day.
And beneficiaries can be very different when it comes to the plan in the trust, the estate plan, from perhaps other types of assets like IRAs or the life insurance or annuities.
That's a
These
good
all
distinction.
have beneficiary designations. Sometimes they do. It's like desirable to include the trust. Sometimes it's not desirable to include the trust. So these are things that usually your estate plan will include some guidance as to how the estate plan intends for these to be handled, but you still have to update the beneficiary designations to make it work in concert with what the estate plan was. And other times people will just do things kind of differently, and then you've got these sort of two different plans kind of happening.
Yep.
I'm going to just touch on one quick thing because it's on my mind. We were talking about it just before coming in, and that is inherited IRAs. These are sometimes, when you it's different from a spouse receiving an IRA. Typically, an individual, like a child from a parent, you have a different kind of IRA. It's an inherited IRA. It doesn't roll over into your own IRA. It's its own animal. And similarly, when you have a distribution from it, which you will have presumably for every year after, well, actually, it depends, right?
It depends.
If your parent died after starting their required beginning date, their benefit, their requirement
RMDs,
distributions, then you continue to have distribution requirements, and they now have to be done every year. But by the end of the 10 years, typically, you have to have the whole amount out. There's some exceptions to this, different rules for different circumstances. Maybe you're a sibling who inherits an IRA and you're within 10 years. That's a different tax treatment. But in any case, in this scenario, we're saying typically you have a 10-year withdrawal treatment. And if the distribution requirements have begun, you have to keep doing them. And in past years, over the last several years, the IRS hasn't enforced that. But this year they are. So if you have an inherited IRA, sometimes called a beneficiary IRA, if you have one of those and your parents were subject to RMDs, you're subject to RMD, make sure you're taking advantage of that. And the calculation of that is a little different. It's not the uniform table. It's a single life table, and it just works differently. So get some help if you need it, but don't overlook it. Probably more to talk about there, but yeah.
You could accelerate the RMD. You could take all of the money.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, the IRS is happy for you to pay the tax on that at any time,
right.
Immediately. But that you have to do it within the 10 years for most circumstances. If it's a certain kind of trust, it might be 5 years, depending on the circumstances. And, so there are a few examples of a 5-year payout period. And then there are some rare, unique examples where you can do it over the old rules, like a lifetime stretch distribution,
lifetime of the beneficiary
yeah. So but those are rare now for new deaths, that kind of thing. So what was it, 2020 when that changed?
Correct.
So people who had a inherited IRA before 2020, you still may benefit from the stretch IRA rules. Talk to a professional if you need help. And again, that's a good example of the kind of reason why you listen to this show and the kind of help that good financial counsel can provide. We try to help you with some of that on our show. So please share that with others. Good lessons learned, we hope. And we hope you will share it and helps people find the show. Share it with a friend. Makes a difference. And we hopefully, you don't want to be that person who says late in life, how'd you come to do this? And the answer is going to be, I listened to something more.
Absolutely.
And why didn't you share it with me? Right. So
speaking of sharing, Chris,
yes.
In the show notes, I'm going to attach a checklist.
Oh, good idea.
As well as a article by Wealth Enhancement Group that Russ brought to our attention. That might be a little bit more information for you. So it's
the checklist. Tell about that checklist.
It's a checklist of things that you would think about doing if a parent died, and it would, a lot of them are common sense that you're going to know about, you're going to think about, but some of them aren't so common, and it might just save you some time and save you some stress in a very difficult situation.
You know what, Jeff? We also have a recent checklist about a parent that's aging.
We do.
Why don't we include that too? Just if it's helpful, people might be dealing with different stages along the way. This might be a tool that could be a resource as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of resources, and feel free to reach out to us. We can provide these resources pretty quickly via email to you. If you're watching on video and maybe don't have access to the show notes, please reach out to us. We're happy to help.
Let's just review that. You can find us on YouTube through the Wealth Enhancement Group's YouTube channel.
Yep.
You can find us on somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com, our webpage. And of course, you can find us through whether it's the audio podcast, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find us there. And please share that wherever you like to listen, share it with others. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, keep striving for something more.
Thank you for listening to Something More with Chris Boyd. Call us for help, whether it's for financial planning or portfolio management, insurance concerns, or those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Whatever's on your mind, visit us at somethingmorewithchrisboyd.com or call us toll free at 866-771-8901. Or send us your questions to amr-info@wealthenhancement.com. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd Financial Talk Show. Wealth Enhancement Advisory Services and J. Christopher Boyd provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. Wealth Enhancement Group cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.